You think your cheap little medals mean anything in the real world, Eliza. You're just a grease monkey, a grunt, a disgrace to this family. Julian, my millionaire brother-in-law, hissed through his teeth. His hand clamped down on my arm, his manicured nails digging straight into an old bullet wound. Sign the deed to that cabin, take this $5,000 handout, and crawl back to whatever stinking barracks you came from, or I'll use my money to crush you. I didn't look at him. I looked at my biological sister and parents standing right behind him. My mother took a sip of her Chianti, smirking entirely on board with watching her own daughter get trampled. A soldier willing to take a bullet in the Middle East only to get stabbed in the back by her own blood. But they forgot one thing: my mechanic cover is a fake. They have no idea who they just declared war on. Before I show you how a U.S. Special Operations Colonel teaches these plastic elites a lesson in real power, hit like and subscribe if you've ever tasted betrayal from your own family. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now watch me crush their arrogance. The smell of Julian's Tom Ford cologne was suffocating. It mixed with the sour tang of my mother's spilled Chianti on the table. His fingernails dug deeper into my left forearm, right into the center of a jagged puckered starburst of scar tissue. A souvenir from an ambush outside Fallujah. It stung. A sharp, hot prick of pain. A single drop of blood welled up, sliding down my skin. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I've had shrapnel dug out of my thigh with a pair of pliers and no morphine. A real estate broker's manicure wasn't going to make me break a sweat. My brain shut off the noise. The anger vanished, replaced by cold, hard arithmetic. Muscle memory took over. Thousands of hours on the mats at Fort Bragg. I didn't think, I executed. I rotated my left wrist outward, breaking his grip. In the same fraction of a second, my right hand shot up, grabbing his wrist. I pivoted my hips, shifted my weight, and applied torque. Julian didn't even have time to process the movement. His elbow hyperextended, locking out with a sickening pop. He screeched. A high, thin, pathetic noise that echoed off the velvet walls of the Giovanni's VIP room. I slammed him downward. His face bounced off the polished mahogany dining table. Silverware clattered. A crystal water glass shattered on the hardwood floor. I stood over him. My left hand pinned the back of his expensive tailored suit jacket, keeping his spine completely immobilized. My right hand held a silver steak fork. The 4 sharp prongs rested exactly 1 inch away from his pulsing jugular vein. I could feel his breath hitching. The erratic, terrified hammering of a man who suddenly realizes his money can't buy his way out of a physical threat. Controlled lethality. One twitch of my wrist, and his throat was open. I didn't twitch. "Julian!" Chloe shrieked. My sister lunged forward from her leather booth. Her heavy diamond earrings swung wildly. She hovered over her husband, her hands fluttering, completely useless. She was terrified to touch him, terrified to get too close to me. I kept my eyes locked on Julian's sweating neck, but my peripheral vision scanned the room. I looked at my parents, the people who gave me life. They didn't rush forward to see if my arm was bleeding. They didn't ask if Julian had hurt me. They shrank back against the far wall. My father's face was ashen, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. My mother was worse. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. Her upper lip curled back. It was the exact same look you'd give a stray rabid dog that had just dragged a rotting carcass onto your pristine white carpet. "You animal!" my mother hissed. Her voice was low, trembling with venom. She raised a shaking finger, pointing toward the frosted glass doors. "Get out of my sight." Not a word about the assault. Not a word about the theft of my land. Just absolute rejection. Blood didn't mean a damn thing in this room. Net worth did. I didn't yell. I didn't demand an apology. I released the pressure on Julian's arm. He scrambled backward like a crab, knocking his heavy dining chair over. He hit the floor, gasping for air, clutching his elbow to his chest. His face was pale and slick with panicked sweat. I stood up straight, adjusted the collar of my faded olive-drab surplus jacket. I looked at the 4 of them one last time. I mentally deleted them from the family column. They were cataloged into a new grid. Non-combatants. Hostile environment. I turned on my heel and walked out. The heavy rubberized soles of my tactical boots hit the Italian marble floor. Thud. 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 A steady mechanical rhythm. I walked through the main dining room. It was packed with Seattle's elite. Tech bros in slim-fit suits, wives dripping in pearls and Botox. They stopped eating their $40 sea base. They stared. I didn't drop my gaze. I kept my shoulders squared, my spine rigid, eyes scanning the exits, assessing the layout. The posture of an apex predator walking through a pen of fattened sheep. I let the heavy glass doors swing shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Chloe's fake theatrical sobbing. The Seattle night air hit me like a wet, freezing rag. It smelled of rain, salt water, and car exhaust. I walked to the back corner of the valet lot. My 1998 Ford F-150 sat under a flickering yellow street lamp. An ugly, rust-spotted beast surrounded by sleek Teslas and imported Porsches. I yanked the heavy steel handle. The rusted door hinge screamed. I slid into the cracked vinyl driver's seat. The cab smelled like old coffee, stale dust, and motor oil. It smelled like reality. In the cup holder, my old burner phone buzzed. The cheap LCD screen illuminated the dark cab with a harsh blue light. A text from Julian. "You messed with the wrong guy. I'm taking that land and throwing your ass on the street." I stared at the glowing letters. He really thought he had the upper hand. He thought his lawyers and his bank accounts were the ultimate weapons. He was a corporate bully who had never had someone shoot back. I didn't reply. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I grabbed the ignition key. The metal was freezing against my calloused fingers. I shoved it into the column and turned. The old V8 engine roared to life. A deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the cold right out of my bones. The headlights cut through the foggy rain. I dropped the shifter into drive and slammed my boot down on the gas pedal. The heavy tires spit wet gravel across the pristine asphalt of the valet lot. I pointed the hood east, toward the Rockies, toward Colorado, where the paved roads stop and my territory begins. 18 hours. That is how long I kept my hands locked on the freezing steering wheel. Seattle faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the jagged, snow-blind stretches of Idaho and the black ice of Wyoming. I did not turn on the radio. I let the steady, high-pitched whine of the heavy all-terrain tires grinding against packed snow fill the cab. That mechanical friction was my therapy. It ground down the leftover adrenaline spiking in my blood. It drowned out the memory of my mother's sneer. By the time I crossed into Colorado, the blizzard was blinding. The Rocky Mountains did not care about Julian's real estate portfolio. Out here, nature swallowed arrogance whole. My grandmother's log cabin sat at the end of a long, unplowed dirt road. To Julian, it was a spreadsheet asset, a prime lot to bulldoze and replace with a glass-front ski chalet for tech executives. To me, it was a decompression chamber. 4 wooden walls where nobody asked for my credit score or judged the dirt under my fingernails. I killed the engine. The silence of the mountain hit me like a physical weight. Inside, the air was bitter. I got the wood stove burning, stripped off my boots, and collapsed onto the old spring mattress. I was physically drained, running on fumes and cold coffee. But exhaustion is a trap for a soldier. That is when the guard drops. That is when the ghosts get in. The cold dragged the PTSD out of the dark corners of my brain. The dream always started the same: heat, dust, the suffocating smell of burning rubber and raw sewage in a blown-out alley in Aleppo. My rifle was up. My heart hammered against my ribcage. I kicked open a splintered wooden door, sweeping the muzzle of my M4 across the room, expecting to find insurgents in the shadows. Instead, I found a dining room. The Giovanni's VIP table sitting right there in the middle of a Syrian war zone. My father, my mother, Chloe, and Julian. They were eating prime rib. They looked up at me. I looked down at my hands. They were soaked in dark, thick blood. It was pooling on the floor, staining my combat boots. My family pointed at me. They threw their heads back and laughed, a mocking, hollow sound that echoed louder than gunfire. Julian raised his wine glass, pointing at the bullet holes in my tactical vest. Then the deafening shriek of an incoming RPG. Boom! I jolted upright. My lungs clawed for air. I threw a blind punch into the empty darkness, my knuckles grazing the rough wood of the headboard. I sat there in the freezing dark, chest heaving. The heavy wool blanket was soaked in cold sweat. My hands were shaking. I pressed my palms hard against my eyes until I saw stars forcing the Syrian alley to dissolve back into the Colorado cabin. Morning broke through the frosted windows, gray and unforgiving. I was standing at the counter pouring a cup of bitter black coffee when the burner phone screamed. The shrill electronic ringtone cut through the quiet cabin like a bone saw. Caller ID, Mom. I stared at the glowing screen. For a split second, the wounded child inside me hoped she was calling to check on me, hoped she saw the blood on my arm last night, and felt a shred of maternal instinct. I swiped the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. You embarrass this family. Her voice came through the cheap speaker, sharp and cold as a razor blade. No greeting, no hesitation. Chloe and Julian are pillars of this community, she snapped. They build things. They create wealth. And what are you, a selfish, miserable failure? You hide in that pathetic shed because you cannot handle the real world. Your father and I have never gotten a single dime out of you. I took a slow sip of the scalding coffee. I let it burn my throat. Sign the land over to Julian today. She demanded, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Stop being a burden on us. Just sign the damn paper and disappear. Click. The line went dead. A hollow dial tone buzzed in my ear. She did not ask if my arm was infected. She didn't ask if I drove through the blizzard safely. She did not ask if I slept. She only cared about the signature on a piece of paper that would make her favorite son-in-law a little richer. I lowered the phone. I did not throw it against the wall. I did not scream. The pain in my chest, the lingering ache of a daughter wanting her mother's love, it finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but white ash. I walked over to my tactical duffel bag dumped on the floor. I unzipped the heavy canvas and dug past my spare magazines and cold weather gear. My fingers brushed against a small, hard plastic box. I pulled it out and popped the latch. The bronze star sat on the black velvet. The heavy metal star, the red and blue ribbon. I stared at it. I thought about the 3 men I dragged out of a burning Humvee to earn this piece of metal. I thought about their blood soaking into my uniform. The President of the United States pinned this on my chest, calling me an American hero. My mother called me a piece of trash. If you know what it feels like to give your blood, your loyalty, and your soul for people who only care about your bank account, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the most hurtful thing a family member has ever said to you about money? Just write it out. Let me know I am not the only one standing in the cold. I snapped the plastic box shut. The sharp clack echoed in the empty room. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. The exhaustion was gone. The hurt was gone. My eyes shifted, hardening into the flat, dead color of gunmetal. The armor of silence was finally forged. I no longer had a family. I had a tactical disadvantage that needed to be neutralized. I set my coffee mug down. I walked to the corner, picked up my heavy splitting axe, and unbolted the front door. The winter storm was waiting outside. It was time to go to work. The wind off the Rockies did not howl. It screamed. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped off the back porch. The temperature was hovering at 10 degrees below zero. The wind snapped at my exposed cheeks like broken glass. I did not have a smart thermostat to turn up. I did not have central heating. I had a cord of frozen oak and a 30-inch splitting axe. I grabbed the thick axe handle. The rough wood bit into my bare palms. I set a heavy round of oak on the chopping block. I squared my stance. I brought the steel axe head up and drove it straight down. Thwack! The heavy steel wedge buried itself into the frozen wood. The log split cleanly in two, hitting the snow with a dull, heavy thud. I set up another one, drove the axe down again. Every swing had a purpose. Every swing was a severance. My sister choosing a millionaire real estate broker over her own blood. Thwack! My father standing in the corner of that restaurant, staring at the floor, too weak to defend me. Thwack! My mother pointing at the door and calling me a rabid animal. Thwack! I swung the axe until my shoulders burned and my breath plumed in the freezing air like thick white smoke. I chopped enough wood to last a full week. I carried the heavy logs inside, dumping them onto the floorboards next to the cast iron stove. I went back out into the blizzard. I checked the diesel reserve on the backup generator. I walked the perimeter of the cabin. I checked the heavy iron latches on the storm windows. I secured the deadbolts. I moved like a machine. Emotion was useless out here. Discipline was survival. I walked back into the kitchen and poured a mug of black coffee. It had been sitting on the stove for 2 hours. It was thick, bitter, and tasted like burnt dirt. I drank it straight down. I stood in the center of the small room, feeling the dry heat slowly radiate from the black iron stove. I remembered the dirt walls of a briefing room in Ramadi, a heavy-set Navy SEAL commander standing at the front of the room. Jocko. He had a simple, brutal rule for surviving a disaster. Mission got canceled. Good. We focus on training. Supplies did not arrive. Good. We learned to fight with less. I looked around the empty, drafty cabin. My family betrayed me for a real estate deal. Good. Now I know exactly who they are. Julian thinks he can use his bank account to starve me out in the dead of winter. Good. I operate better in the cold. Isolation was not a punishment. It was a tactical advantage. A sniper does not bring a cheering section to an overwatch position. You go alone. If you do not have anyone standing beside you, you do not have anyone who can stab you in the back. I was an army of one. I did not need their validation. I did not need their money. I looked down at my hands. The heavy axe handle had torn open the calluses on my palms. Blisters were forming red and raw right next to the pale white scars from old shrapnel burns. The physical pain felt clean. It made sense. It pushed the toxic, lingering ache of my mother's phone call out of my head. I walked over to the wooden mantel above the fireplace. 3 silver picture frames sat in the dust. Pictures of my grandmother. The woman who built this cabin. The only person in the Green family who ever looked at me with pride when I put on a military uniform. I took the frames down. I wiped the glass clean with my flannel sleeve. I packed them carefully into a waterproof plastic crate and shoved it deep under the floorboards. Julian and his corporate lawyers were coming for this land. They wanted to bulldoze it. They wanted to scrub the dirt and build a glass palace for tech billionaires. I would not let them look at her face. I would not let their filthy, greedy hands touch a single clean memory I had left. The cabin was no longer a retreat. It was a bunker. It was just past noon. The storm outside was breaking, leaving a blinding glare on the fresh mountain snow. I was sitting at the wooden kitchen table, stripping down my Glock 19. The sharp chemical smell of Hoppa's No. 9 gun solvent filled the room. On the far end of the table, my Panasonic Toughbook sat open. The heavy armor-plated military laptop was running off the generator power, its cooling fan humming a low, steady drone. It was silent, until it was not. Beep. A shrill, piercing electronic alarm cut through the quiet cabin. I dropped the slide of the pistol. I slid the laptop across the rough wood. The screen glowed green. I had installed a tracking script tapping into FAA flight logs. It was scanning for any private tail numbers registered to Julian's holding company. A red dot blinked on the digital map. A Gulfstream EG 650. It had just wheels up from Boeing Field in Seattle. Destination, Aspen, Colorado. Estimated time of arrival, 2 hours. Aspen was exactly 30 miles down the mountain from my front door. I stared at the blinking red dot. I could picture them right now. Julian sitting in a plush leather seat, drinking expensive champagne, laughing with my sister. My parents sitting across from him, eating catered caviar, flying private for the first time in their lives. They were sitting in a pressurized cabin at 40,000 feet, burning jet fuel, funded by corporate extortion, on their way to watch the poor, pathetic grunt get thrown into the snow. They were bringing an audience for the slaughter. They thought they were hunting a mechanic. I picked up the black coffee mug. I took one last slow sip. The bitter taste coated my tongue. Julian did not let go. He wanted to push this over the edge. Good. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. I pushed the chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floorboards. I walked past the kitchen, past the bedroom. I stopped at the heavy steel door at the back of the hallway. The combination lock felt freezing under my fingers. It was time to open the real armory. The heavy steel door of the safe swung open. No creaking, perfectly oiled hinges. Inside, the air smelled like hops, gun solvent, molded foam, and cold metal. Not the tools of a grease monkey, the tools of a Tier 1 operator. I bypassed the rifles and reached for the black Pelican case on the top shelf. I popped the heavy plastic latches. Inside sat an Iridium 955 satellite phone. Thick, ugly, built to survive a bomb blast. I walked back into the living room, standing near the cast iron stove. The heat radiated against my heavy denim jeans, warming my frozen legs. I flipped the thick plastic antenna up. I punched in a 16-digit alphanumeric sequence, a routing code that did not go to a local police precinct. It bypassed the civilian grid, bounced off a satellite in low Earth orbit, and dropped straight into a secure, windowless sub-basement of the Pentagon. The speaker hissed. Heavy static crackled in the quiet room. Then a voice. Deep, coated in gravel and 50 years of chain smoking. Colonel Green, General James Higgins, 4-star Commander, Joint Special Operations Command. Hearing that title, Colonel hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Less than 24 hours ago, I was standing in a high-end Seattle restaurant. My mother looked me dead in the eye and called me a pathetic failure, a burden. My brother-in-law treated me like a stray dog begging for scraps. Here on this encrypted line, I was recognized as one of the deadliest assets in the United States military arsenal. "Sir," I said. My voice was steady. I stood up a little straighter. Muscle memory. You do not slouch when a 4-star is on the line, even if you are 3,000 miles away in a snowstorm. "I was just looking at your file, Eliza," Higgins said. The static popped. "The president brought your name up this morning. He wants to schedule the ceremony, wants to pin the Distinguished Service Medal on your chest in the Oval Office himself." A hard lump formed in the back of my throat. I swallowed it down. It tasted like ash. The contrast was sickening. The commander-in-chief wanted to honor my blood. My own mother wanted me dead in a ditch so she could fly private to Aspen. "That can wait, sir," I said, locking my jaw. "What's your status?" "My perimeter is compromised. Hostiles inbound." A heavy pause on the other end. "Explain." "Julian Vance, my brother-in-law. Extortion, physical assault, and trespassing. He just landed a Gulfstream 30 miles from my location. He's bringing my biological family. They want to forcibly seize this property. He made a threat to my life last night." Higgins did not sigh. He did not ask if I was overreacting. He knew exactly what kind of psychological damage a civilian family could inflict on a returning operator. He had buried too many good soldiers who lost the war at home. "Colonel," Higgins grunted. The tone shifted. It was no longer a friendly check-in. It was a tactical briefing. "Repeat your oath of commission." I stared at the glowing orange coals through the iron grate of the wood stove. "To support and defend the Constitution of the United States," I recited the words cold and automatic. "Against all enemies, foreign and domestic." "Domestic," Higgins repeated. The word hung in the air, heavy and loaded. A tyrant in a tailored suit is still a tyrant. A corporate bully who puts his hands on a U.S. officer is a hostile combatant. You do not retreat. You do not surrender your ground. "They are my family, sir." The words tasted like poison coming out of my mouth. "No, they aren't," Higgins snapped. "Blood only makes you relatives, Eliza. Loyalty makes you family. Your family is right here. Your family wears the uniform. Those people in that private jet, they are a threat to your safety." The psychological chains snapped. Every ounce of guilt, every shred of hesitation I had about fighting my own sister, my own parents, it evaporated. Higgins just handed me the key to my own cage. He gave me permission to stop being a victim. "Understood, sir," I said. The coldness was back, the icy mechanical calm. Suddenly a noise cut through the silence of the cabin. It was not the wind. It was not the creak of the old floorboards. It was a high-pitched mechanized whine. Like an oversized, angry hornet. I did not move my head. I just cut my eyes toward the frosted glass of the front window. Hovering exactly 4 feet off the porch, perfectly level with the glass, was a commercial quadcopter drone. sleek white plastic. 4 spinning rotors whipping up the loose snow. A small red LED light blinked rhythmically. Below the chassis, a high-definition camera lens was swiveled, pointing dead center at my chest. Julian was not just coming. He was already here, sitting in a heated luxury SUV somewhere at the bottom of the mountain, flying his little toy, playing his arrogant little game. He wanted to watch me squirm. He wanted to broadcast my eviction. I lifted the heavy sat phone back to my mouth. I did not take my eyes off the blinking red light. "Sir, I have a visual on a reconnaissance drone. It just breached the porch perimeter. They are putting eyes on the target." The static hissed over the line. Higgins did not ask for a risk assessment. He did not tell me to call the local sheriff. His voice came through the speaker, cold, flat, and absolute. "Weapons free, Colonel." I reached over and hit the red button. The sat phone went dark. The war just started. And Julian brought a plastic toy to a gunfight. 30 miles down the mountain, parked at the edge of the snowline, the heater in Julian's Porsche Cayenne blew hot, dry air. It smelled like expensive upholstered leather and arrogance. He slouched in the driver's seat, rubbing his swollen elbow. He balanced an iPad on the steering wheel. The screen displayed a crisp, high-definition feed from the commercial drone hovering outside my cabin window. Julian pulled out his iPhone with his good hand. He hit the FaceTime icon. Idling directly behind the Porsche was a black Lincoln Navigator. Inside sat my mother, my father, and Chloe. The FaceTime call connected. Julian grinned his teeth, showing white in the dim cab. He linked the drone's camera feed directly into the group chat. "All right, showtime," Julian said, his voice slick with anticipation. "I told you we wouldn't even need the lawyers. Watch her break." Through the phone speaker, my mother let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh. It was the same laugh she used at country club luncheons when someone spilled wine on a cheap dress. "Make sure you get a clear shot of her face when she realizes she is getting thrown out into the snow," my mother said. "Maybe then she will finally learn some respect." Chloe chimed in, her voice shrill and nasal. "Babe, just do not damage the wood paneling. I want to list the lot by next Tuesday." They were treating my eviction, my survival, like an episode of cheap reality television. A fun little family outing. They flew private across 2 states just to sit in heated luxury vehicles and watch me freeze. Julian tapped the screen of his phone. Inside the cabin, my old burner phone vibrated violently against the rough wood of the kitchen table. The screen lit up, a text message. "Come out of the house. I will give you $5,000 cash right now. If you do not, I will burn that shack down to the dirt." I stood in the center of the living room. The red LED light of the drone blinked through the frosted glass, recording every move I made. I did not pick up the phone to call him. I did not type out a long, emotional paragraph about how much he was hurting the family. I did not beg. I picked up the burner phone with 2 fingers. I typed exactly 14 words. "Julian, this is your final warning. You are committing domestic terrorism. Retreat immediately." I hit send. Then I dropped the phone into the cast iron stove. The cheap plastic melted instantly, curling into black smoke. Down in the Porsche, Julian read the text message. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud braying sound that bounced off the leather interior. "Domestic terrorism." Julian choked out, wiping a tear from his eye. "She thinks she is Rambo. Look at her. A broke mechanic living in a shed trying to talk tough. This is pathetic." "She has always been delusional," my mother's voice sneered through the speaker. "Just flush her out, Julian. We have dinner reservations at Matsuhisa at 8. I did not hear their conversation, but I knew the playbook. I knew exactly how cowardly men like Julian operated when they thought they held all the cards. They confused patience with weakness. I turned my back to the window. I walked back to the open steel safe. I bypassed the Macmillan TAC-50 sniper rifle. I ignored the suppressed MP7 submachine gun. Those were surgical tools. I did not need surgery. I needed a sledgehammer. I reached to the bottom rack and pulled out the Remington 870 shotgun. It was heavy. The cold steel felt solid in my hands. The black synthetic stock was battered and scratched from years of hard use. I shoved a thick red double-aught buckshot shell into the loading port. My thumb hit the slide release. Click, clack. The mechanical rack of the pump-action shotgun was the loudest sound in the cabin. It was not just a noise, it was a universal language. It meant the talking was over. I turned around. I did not run to the window. I walked. A slow, measured, heavy heel-to-toe stride. I stopped exactly 3 feet from the glass. I raised the Remington. I seated the heavy stock tight against the pocket of my shoulder. I leveled the front bead sight. Through the iPad screen down in the Porsche, Julian stopped laughing. The high-definition feed suddenly filled with the image of a woman who did not look like a broken mechanic. Her posture was dead center, her eyes were completely flat, and taking up the middle of the frame was the dark, hollow 1-inch diameter of a shotgun barrel pointed straight at the camera lens. "Wait," Julian muttered, sitting up straight. "What the hell is she doing?" "Is that a gun?" Chloe shrieked from the navigator. I squeezed the trigger. Boom! The concussion shook the dust from the cabin rafters. The heavy load of lead buckshot shattered the window pane into a million glittering pieces. It caught the plastic drone dead center. The quadcopter did not just break, it disintegrated. White plastic, lithium batteries, and expensive camera parts exploded into a cloud of shrapnel and black smoke raining down onto the pristine Colorado snow. The sharp sulfur smell of burnt gunpowder flooded the cabin. Down at the snow line, Julian's iPad went completely black. A small spinning wheel appeared in the center of the dark screen, searching for a signal that was already spread across 50 yards of mountain dirt. Silence hung heavy inside the Porsche. 3 seconds passed. Julian stared at the black screen. His mouth hung open. The realization hit him like a brick. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She blew his expensive surveillance equipment out of the sky without blinking. Julian slammed his fist down onto the leather steering wheel. He let out a scream that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with pure, unhinged humiliation. The echo of the shotgun blast faded, swallowed by the mountain wind. The smashed plastic of Julian's drone burned in the snow, a tiny orange fire in the pitch-black night. I stepped back from the shattered window. The cold rushed in, biting at my neck. I didn't board it up. I needed the sightline. I reached into my chest rig and pulled out a flare breech thermal monocular. I pressed the rubber cup against my right eye. The digital screen booted up. The mountain was dead and cold, painted in dark grays and blacks. But down at the tree line, exactly 200 yards away, the screen lit up. Orange, bright glowing human-shaped blobs of heat. I counted them. 2, 4, 8, 12. A full squad. They were moving in a staggered zigzag formation, bounding from tree to tree. Professional spacing. Muzzle sweeps covering their sectors. These were not local cops serving an eviction notice. These were corporate goons. Private military contractors. Black tusk most likely, judging by the heavy plate carriers and high-cut helmets. Julian opened his checkbook wide. He did not just want me out of the cabin anymore. He wanted me buried under it. I lowered the thermal. 12 heavily armed contractors. 1 woman. Out in the civilian world, those are terrible odds. You call 911. You hide. You pray. But I knew the reality. Julian already bragged about the county sheriff. The cops were not coming. If I dialed 911, the dispatcher would hang up. I was completely, utterly isolated. For a normal person, that is a death sentence. For a Tier 1 operator, it is a blank canvas. It means I do not have to worry about collateral damage. I walked to the utility closet. I flipped the heavy metal latch and grabbed the main electrical breaker. I ripped it down. Clack. The low hum of the refrigerator died. The stove light vanished. The entire cabin plunged into a suffocating, ink-black darkness. I stripped them of their environment. They were walking into a structure they did not know blind. I moved through the dark by memory. I dragged a heavy sack of baking flour from the pantry. I dumped it across the entryway floor, directly inside the front door. Flour is highly combustible when suspended in the air. I grabbed a roll of 50-pound test fishing line. I tied one end to the heavy iron door hinge, ran it tight across the threshold at ankle height, and looped the other end to the pin of a marine flare, zip-tied to a heavy table leg. A homemade flashbang. Primitive, effective. I walked back to the center of the living room. My boots made no sound on the floorboards. I opened the black Pelican case again. The molded foam held my real eyes. A set of GPN VG18S ground panoramic night vision goggles, 4 separate tubes protruding from a specialized mount, $40,000 worth of military hardware. I locked them into the bracket on my bump helmet and pulled them down over my eyes. The pitch-black room instantly ignited into a crisp, high-definition world of bright phosphorus green. I could see the wood grain on the floor. I could see the dust motes hanging in the cold air. I slung the heavy Remington 870 onto my back. It was too loud. Too much recoil for multiple targets in a confined space. I picked up the Heckler & Koch MP7. It was compact, lethal. Chambered in 4.6 by 30 millimeters, designed to punch straight through Kevlar body armor. A long, heavy suppressor was threaded onto the barrel. I pulled the charging handle back. A round slid into the chamber. I clicked the safety selector switch to semi-auto. I did not retreat to the bedroom. I did not hide in the bathtub. I grabbed the heavy leather armchair from the corner of the room. I dragged it right into the middle of the living room. Dead center. Directly facing the heavy oak front door. In tactical terms, the doorway is called the fatal funnel. It is the choke point, the spot where an entry team is completely exposed before they can fan out into a room. Most people run away from it. I sat directly in front of it. I sat down in the leather chair. I crossed my left ankle over my right knee. I rested the MP7 across my lap, my trigger finger resting straight and flat along the cold receiver. On the side table next to me sat a mug of green tea. It was ice cold now. I picked it up with my left hand, took a slow sip, and set it back down. If you have ever had to stand your ground when everyone else expected you to break, hit that like button and subscribe right now. I want to know who is in the trenches with me. Drop a comment below and tell me what is the one everyday object in your house right now that you would grab to defend yourself. A baseball bat? A kitchen knife? A heavy flashlight? Let me know. Through the green tint of the NVGs, I watched the heavy oak door. Outside, the crunching of boots on the snow stopped. They were stacked up on the porch, 12 bodies pressing against the frozen wood. I could not see them, but I could feel the heat of them through the floorboards. They were communicating with hand signals, taking their positions. They thought they had the element of surprise. They thought they were about to breach the home of a terrified crying woman. Then I heard it. It was soft, barely audible over the howling wind outside. But to a trained ear, it was unmistakable. Reap! The sharp synthetic sound of heavy adhesive tape being peeled off a roll. Someone was pressing a block of C4 explosive directly against the wood right over the deadbolt. My heart did not speed up. It slowed down, beating a steady rhythmic drum inside my chest. I tightened my grip on the MP7. Any second now. Boom! The block of C4 detonated. The concussive wave punched me square in the chest. The heavy oak front door blew inward, splintering into jagged daggers of wood that rained down across the flour-dusted floor. The smell of high explosives and charred timber instantly choked the oxygen out of the room. I did not flinch. Through the green glow of my night vision, they poured through the doorway. 3 men stacked tight. Professional breach. The point man callsign Viper swept his rifle left, then right. A blinding white beam from his surefire weapon light sliced through the pitch-black cabin. He was moving fast, adrenaline pumping. He expected to find a hysterical mechanic cowering under a bed or screaming in the corner. He expected an easy paycheck from a rich idiot. The white beam swept across the center of the room and stopped. Dead center. The beam hit my chest. I sat perfectly still in the leather armchair. I did not raise the MP7. I kept it resting flat across my thighs. I stared straight down the barrel of his M4 rifle. Viper froze, his heavy combat boots planted hard into the floorboards. The 2 men behind him slammed into his back, causing a clumsy, amateurish pileup in the fatal funnel. They saw the 4 separate tubes of the GPN VG-18 night vision rig covering my face. That hardware alone cost more than their entire contract for the night. They saw the heavy suppressed submachine gun. But that is not what broke them. The blinding white light of Viper's flashlight hit the left breast pocket of my olive drab jacket. The light bounced off a small metallic object, pinned right over my heart. The insignia of the Joint Special Operations Command. Tier 1. Viper lowered his rifle barrel an inch. His breathing hitched. I could see the exact second his brain processed the shiny piece of metal. He was a mercenary. A hired gun. He knew the difference between shaking down a civilian and aiming a loaded weapon at an active-duty federal officer. One gets you a slap on the wrist and a nice payday. The other gets you a one-way trip to a black site for domestic terrorism and treason. "You forgot to knock," I said. My voice was flat, cold, no yelling. No bravado. Just the absolute certainty of a predator staring at a very stupid piece of meat. The fear hit Viper like a physical blow. His voice cracked high and panicked, shredding his tough guy mercenary persona. "Code Red," Viper screamed. He scrambled backward, his boots slipping on the flour coating the floor. "Code Red, fall back. It's a Tier 1. Commander, fall back right now." The tactical discipline vanished. The breach team dissolved into a chaotic, terrified mob. The men behind him did not ask questions. They heard the panic in his voice and jammed themselves back through the splintered doorway, shoving each other out of the way to get outside. They wanted no part of this. I waited until the last man turned his back. Then I lifted my left hand and gave the heavy fishing line a hard, sharp yank. The marine flare popped. The intense burning heat ignited the cloud of baking flour hanging in the entryway. A massive, blinding fireball erupted in the confined space. It was not a lethal explosion, but it was a blinding, deafening flash of white-hot chaos. The mercenaries screamed, shielding their eyes, tumbling off the frozen porch and rolling into the snowdrifts to extinguish the singed fabric of their tactical gear. They scrambled to their feet, completely disorganized, and ran full sprint down the driveway toward the tree line. Down at the bottom of the mountain, the blizzard was blowing hard. Julian stood outside his heated Porsche. The heavy snow coated his expensive wool topcoat. He saw the flash of the explosion through the trees. He grinned. He thought his money just bought him a piece of prime Colorado real estate. Then he heard the heavy, panicked breathing of men running for their lives. Viper and his squad burst through the tree line. They did not maintain formation. They threw their rifles into the beds of their unmarked black pickup trucks and scrambled into the cabs. "Hey!" Julian yelled, stepping in front of Viper's truck. He waved his arms, his face twisting into an ugly, entitled sneer. "What the hell are you doing? Get back up there. I paid you 50 grand to clear that cabin." Viper stopped. He was covered in soot. His tactical gear singed his eyes wide with adrenaline and pure terror. He looked at the soft, arrogant millionaire standing in the snow. Julian stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at the mercenary's chest. "You work for me, you piece of trash. Get back up that hill and do your job before I ruin your pathetic little company." Viper did not argue. He did not explain. He drew his right arm back and threw a massive closed fist punch straight into Julian's face. The heavy carbon fiber knuckles of Viper's tactical glove connected with Julian's nose. A sickening crunch echoed in the cold air. Blood sprayed across the pristine white snow. Julian collapsed against the hood of the Porsche, screaming, clutching his shattered face. Viper grabbed Julian by the lapels of his expensive coat and slammed him down hard against the cold metal hood. "You stupid son of a bitch!" Viper spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You didn't tell us she was JSOC. You just tried to pay us to assassinate a federal officer. That is treason. You are dead. And if you ever contact us again, I will put a bullet in your head myself." Viper shoved Julian off the hood. He jumped into the driver's seat of his truck, slammed it into gear, and floored it. The heavy tires spun, kicking up a massive spray of slush and mud, leaving the millionaire lying in the dirt. Julian lay in the snow, gasping for air. Blood poured from his nose, soaking the collar of his custom shirt. His $50,000 mercenary team was gone. His drone was gone. His leverage was gone. He slowly pushed himself up. He looked at his shaking, blood-stained hands. The entitlement in his brain snapped. He was not a rational businessman anymore. He was a cornered, humiliated animal. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a snub-nosed .38 special revolver. His eyes locked onto the dark cabin at the top of the hill. Julian leveled the .38 special at the cabin. His hands were shaking so hard the short steel barrel rattled. Blood dripped from his shattered nose, freezing onto his chin. He was out of his depth. He was a man who negotiated hostile corporate takeovers in air-conditioned boardrooms. He bought politicians with campaign donations. He did not know how to fight in the mud. He did not know what to do when someone hit back, so he panicked. He squeezed the trigger. Pop. Pop. 2 weak shots cracked through the freezing air. The bullets went wild. One buried itself into a pine tree. The other chipped the frozen dirt 50 feet short of my porch. "Come out here," Julian screamed. His voice was shrill, cracking with hysteria. "I own this town. I play golf with the county sheriff. You hear me? I pay his salary. My taxes pay your pathetic little military salary, you broke piece of trash." I stood in the dark. I took the GPN VG-18 night vision off my helmet. I set the MP7 down on the table. I did not put on a Kevlar vest. I did not grab a backup weapon. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The wind ripped at my jacket. I stood there bathed in the moonlight, looking down the slope. Julian saw me. He aimed the revolver with both hands. He was hyperventilating. I looked at him. I did not see a threat. I saw a worm. A pathetic soft creature flailing on the pavement after a hard rain. "You are wrong, Julian," I said. I did not yell. My voice was calm and flat, carrying down the snowy slope. "The county sheriff does not have jurisdiction here. Look up." Julian blinked. Blood ran into his left eye. He kept the gun aimed at me, but his head twitched upward. The air changed. It did not just get colder, it started to vibrate. A low, heavy, unnatural pressure pushed down on the mountain. The snow around Julian's boots began to whip up into a violent, swirling cyclone. Then the sound hit. Thwack, 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 thwack. The deafening, chest-rattling roar of twin rotors chopping through the thin mountain air. 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters crested the ridge. They were completely blacked out. No running lights, just 2 massive mechanical predators dropping out of the night sky. Julian's mouth fell open. The .38 special drooped in his hands. The lead Black Hawk flared, hovering exactly 60 feet directly above the Porsche. "Light him up," a voice cracked over a loudspeaker. A searchlight clicked on. It was not a flashlight. It was a military-grade night sun. Millions of candle power of pure blinding white light slammed down from the belly of the helicopter, pinning Julian against the snow. It was brighter than the midday sun. It burned away the shadows. It burned away his arrogance. Julian dropped the gun. He threw his hands over his face, blinded, screaming in terror. Thick, fast rope lines dropped from the open side doors of the Blackhawks. Dark figures slid down the ropes, hitting the snow with heavy synchronized thuds. They fanned out instantly. Black tactical gear, Kevlar helmets, assault rifles leveled. The white letters FBI and MP were stenciled across their plate carriers. "Drop the weapon, get on the ground, do it now." The command ripped through the bullhorn, drowning out the roar of the rotors. Julian did not move fast enough. He was frozen, blinded by the light, whining like a kicked dog. A military police officer did not wait. He stepped forward and swept his heavy boot behind Julian's knees. Julian collapsed. Before he even hit the ground, 2 FBI agents were on his back. A heavy knee drove right between his shoulder blades, pinning him face first into the freezing mixture of snow and his own blood. He squealed, "Wait, stop, I have money. Call my lawyer." "Shut your mouth," an agent growled. Click, click. The sharp metallic bite of steel handcuffs ratcheted tight around Julian's soft wrists. They pulled his arms back violently, locking his shoulders into an agonizing bind. Headlights cut through the snowstorm at the bottom of the hill. The black Lincoln Navigator slid to a sloppy stop near the tree line. The rear doors flew open. My father, my mother, and Chloe piled out. They were dressed in designer winter coats, holding expensive smartphones. They came to watch the show. They came to record my eviction. Instead, they stepped into a war zone. Chloe dropped her phone into a snowbank. She stared at the blinding searchlight. She saw her millionaire husband pinned to the hood of his wrecked Porsche. his face buried in the mud, completely surrounded by heavily armed federal agents. "Julian!" Chloe shrieked, taking a step forward. An MP raised his hand, pointing a rifle barrel directly at her chest. "Stay back, federal perimeter. Put your hands where I can see them." My parents froze. The smug, self-satisfied smirks they had worn during the FaceTime call vanished. My mother's jaw went slack. The Botox in her forehead could not hide the sheer, absolute panic flooding her features. They looked up the hill. They saw me standing on the porch, arms crossed, unbothered, untouched. The side door of the lead Blackhawk slid open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an army dress uniform stepped out onto the skid. The wind whipped at his dark green overcoat. He grabbed the fast rope, sliding down to the snow with practiced ease. He stood up. He adjusted his coat. On each shoulder flap, 4 silver stars gleamed under the harsh searchlight. General James Higgins. He did not look at Julian bleeding in the snow. He did not look at my terrified parents standing by their luxury SUV. He turned his back to them. He looked up the hill, locking eyes with me. He began to walk. Slow, measured, heavy steps straight toward the cabin. General Higgins did not run. He walked up the snow-covered driveway with the heavy, deliberate stride of a man used to giving orders that moved fleets across oceans. The freezing wind tore at his dark green overcoat, but his posture remained completely rigid. He walked right past my parents. He did not acknowledge them. He walked past Chloe, who was sobbing hysterically into her hands. He ignored the federal agents dragging Julian out of the mud by his cuffs. Higgins stopped at the base of the wooden porch steps. He looked up at me. For the first time since this nightmare started, I did not feel like a stray dog. I stood up straight. I squared my shoulders. Higgins brought his right hand up in a crisp, flawless military salute. The snap of his boots hitting together cut through the noise of the hovering Blackhawks. "Colonel Green." Higgins barked, his deep voice carrying over the wind. "Is the perimeter secure?" I raised my hand, returning the salute. Crisp, automatic. "Perimeter is secure, sir." Down by the Lincoln Navigator, my mother gasped. A sharp, ugly sound like a dying engine trying to turn over. Her face, previously twisted in that arrogant country club sneer, went completely slack. The expensive makeup looked like a cheap mask melting off her skin. "Colonel," my mother stammered. She pointed a trembling finger wrapped in a thick diamond ring toward the porch. "What? What did you call her? She is a mechanic. She fixes trucks." Higgins turned his head slowly. He did not move his body, just his neck. His eyes locked onto her. If looks could draw blood, my mother would have bled out in the snow, right there. "You do not speak to her," Higgins said. His voice was low, but it had the weight of a judge handing down a death sentence. He took one step down the stairs toward the driveway. "While you were sleeping on your soft mattresses and drinking expensive wine, Colonel Green was bleeding on the front lines. She led a Tier 1 unit into Fallujah. She dragged 3 men out of a burning Humvee with shrapnel in her arm. She has saved more lives in a single deployment than your entire parasitic family has contributed to society in a century." My father took a step back, his hands shaking in his coat pockets. He looked like a cornered rat. Chloe collapsed to her knees in the snow. The reality was setting in. Her husband was not a powerful real estate mogul tonight. He was a domestic terrorist facing a federal judge. And the sister she had spent her life mocking was the one person who could have stopped it. Higgins took another step forward. The space between him and my mother vanished. "You called her a failure," Higgins growled. "You stood by while that piece of garbage son-in-law of yours hired mercenaries to assault an active-duty federal officer." I did not know," my mother choked out. Tears finally spilled over her heavy mascara, freezing on her cheeks. "Eliza never told us. She never. She did not tell you because you are a security risk?" Higgins snapped, cutting her off. "She did not tell you because you are shallow, greedy, and disloyal. You look at her and see a paycheck you cannot cash. I look at her and see the best this country has to offer." He pointed a thick, gloved finger down at Julian, who was currently being shoved into the back of a heavily armored FBI SUV. Julian was crying, actual pathetic sobs echoing into the night. "You should get down on your knees and thank God for her discipline." Higgins said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because if she had followed standard rules of engagement for a hostile breach, she would have legally blown his head off 30 minutes ago. And I would have pinned a medal on her for it. The silence that followed was heavier than the blizzard. The illusion was dead. The country club facade was completely ripped away. They were exposed. They were just greedy small people who had pushed the wrong soldier too far. My mother looked past the general. She looked up at the porch. At me, she stretched out her hands. The diamond rings caught the harsh glare of the helicopter searchlight. "Eliza!" She sobbed. Her voice cracked. "Please, daughter." I stared down at her. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and I felt nothing. Absolute, pure nothing. Like looking at a stranger in a grocery store. She was not crying because she loved me. She was crying because she was terrified. She was crying because the mechanic she hated suddenly held all the power. I dropped my gaze from her face. I looked directly at General Higgins. "Sir," I said, my voice completely flat and indifferent. "My tea got cold. Would you care to come inside for a fresh cup?" Higgins looked back at me. A slight grim smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "I would appreciate that, Colonel." I turned my back on my mother. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Chloe screaming in the snow. I walked back into the cabin. I grabbed the heavy reinforced steel storm door. Clang! I pulled it shut. The heavy metal deadbolt slid into place with a loud freezing cha-chunk. I locked them outside in the dark. 6 months, that is how long it took for the ice to finally break. Spring hit the Rockies hard. The heavy snowdrifts of December turned into rushing mud and loud freezing creeks, cutting through the dense pine trees. I stood in the kitchen of the cabin. The wood stove was burning low, throwing a soft orange heat across the scuffed floorboards. The air smelled like fresh roasted coffee and wet dirt. It was a clean smell, a quiet smell. I set my heavy ceramic mug on the counter. Next to it sat a plain white envelope. The return address was a P.O. box in Leavenworth, Kansas, United States Penitentiary. Julian got 15 years, federal time, no parole, no early release for good behavior. The Department of Justice ripped through his real estate empire like a chainsaw. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy. It turns out when you hire a private military company to kill an active duty federal officer, the government takes a very close look at your corporate tax returns. My parents filed for bankruptcy trying to pay his legal fees. Chloe had to move into a cheap 2-bedroom apartment over a strip mall in Tacoma. The country club memberships were gone. The Porsche was impounded. The illusion was completely shattered. I looked down at the envelope. His handwriting was shaky, barely legible. Through the thin, cheap prison paper, I could make out the first line pressed in blue ink. "Dear sister-in-law." He wanted a character reference, a letter to the federal judge asking for leniency on an appeal. He wanted the broke mechanic to save him. I did not open it. I did not even feel a spark of anger, just a deep, quiet, hollow pity. I picked up the envelope with 2 fingers, walked over to the cast-iron stove, and kicked the heavy iron door open with my boot. I tossed the paper directly onto the red-hot coals. The paper curled, turned black, and ignited with a soft, quick whoosh. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but gray ash. The last string tying me to my toxic bloodline, turning to carbon and floating up the chimney. I closed the stove door. I walked to the front of the cabin and pushed the door open. The morning sunlight was blinding, reflecting off the remaining patches of snow on the peaks. The splintered oak door was gone, replaced by a heavy reinforced steel security door. I bought it in Denver, hauled it up the mountain in the bed of my F-150, and welded the heavy hinges myself. But the front yard was different. At the bottom of the long dirt driveway, planted deep in the thawing mud, stood a heavy wooden sign. I carved the 3 words into the thick cedar myself: the Green Sanctuary. I did not sign the deed over to Julian. I put the land in a blind trust. I took 20 years of Special Operations Hazard Pay combat deployment bonuses and government pensions, and I poured every single dime into this mountain. Julian used his wealth to crush people who were smaller than him. I used mine to build a perimeter for people who needed a place to breathe. A veteran retreat, completely off the grid. No doctors with clipboards asking stupid clinical questions about PTSD. No pitting looks from civilians. Just quiet woods, cold air, hard physical labor, and respect. I stepped out onto the porch. Mike was sitting on a wooden bench in the sun. Former Army Ranger. He had a can of gun oil and a dirty rag methodically wiping down the aluminum shafts of his forearm crutches. His left leg ended right above the knee. An IED outside Kandahar took the rest. He did not look up when the door opened, but he heard my boots on the wood. Sarah was leaning against the porch rail. 3 tours as a combat medic in Helmand Province. She had a mug of black coffee in one hand. Sitting right next to her boots was a massive scarred Belgian Malinois. The service dog let out a low, happy bark and thumped its heavy tail against the wood. The dog walked over, pressing his heavy head against my knee. I reached down and scratched him behind the ears. I looked at Mike and Sarah. We did not share a single drop of DNA. We did not grow up in the same house. We did not have the same last name. But I knew exactly what Mike's face looked like when the night terrors hit him. I knew Sarah would take a bullet for me without blinking, and I would do the exact same for her. Blood is just an accident of biology. It gives you relatives. But loyalty, shared pain, that builds a family. We were a pack of broken, scarred parts that found a way to fit together. Nobody on this mountain cared about bank accounts. Nobody here looked at you like a burden. Mike stopped rubbing the aluminum crutch. He tossed the oily rag onto the bench and looked up, squinting into the bright Colorado sun. "We good, Commander?" Mike asked. His voice was rough, scarred from smoke and dry air. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee. I looked out over the tree line, past the dirt road, out toward the jagged, massive peaks of the Rockies, cutting into the clear blue sky. The air was perfectly still. The perimeter was secure. The war was over. "Better than good, Mike," I said. "Sometimes to find your real family, you have to step over the corpse of their fake expectations. Blood only gives you a starting line. It does not dictate where you finish. You are the only one who gets to choose the safe harbor for your soul. If you have ever had to burn the bridge to your past just to build your own sunrise, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and type sunrise so I know you made it out of the dark. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to walk with me into the next story.